In 1374, the Rhineland was gripped by a bizarre and terrifying phenomenon that left people bewildered and terrified. Imagine a scene where people, seemingly normal, suddenly started dancing uncontrollably in the streets and churches, leaping and screaming for hours on end. This wasn't a festival or a celebration. It was a mania that swept through the region, leaving its victims exhausted and in agony. They believed they were possessed by demons, and their desperate dances were an attempt to exorcise these evil spirits. This was the Dancing Mania, a strange and disturbing episode that has puzzled historians for centuries. The Dancing Mania, also known as the Dancing Plague, began in the Rhineland in the 1370s. It wasn't just a local phenomenon. It spread to other parts of Europe, including Holland and Flanders. The victims were mostly the poor peasants, artisans, servants, and beggars, with a significant number of women, especially those who were unmarried. They would gather in circles, dance for hours, and when they finally collapsed from exhaustion, they would roll on the ground, groaning and writhing as if in the grip of some terrible torment. Some claimed to see visions of Christ, the Virgin Mary, or even the heavens opening up. It was a stark reminder of the fear and superstition that gripped medieval society. The causes of the Dancing Mania are still debated. Some historians believe it was a response to the miseries and homelessness caused by the heavy spring floods of the Rhine that year. Others think it was a spontaneous symptom of a disturbed time, a manifestation of the deep anxieties and tensions that were brewing in society. Whatever the cause, the participants were convinced that they were possessed by demons. They called out to these demons, begging them to stop tormenting them, or they cried out that they saw visions of the divine. The mania was so intense that it even led to sexual revels, but the primary focus was always on exorcism and the belief that demons were at work. The clergy, already struggling to maintain control over a populace that was growing increasingly restless and skeptical, found themselves facing a new and terrifying challenge. Priests performed as many exorcisms as they could, and the public, sharing in the presence of demons, watched in awe and fear. Processions and masses were held to pray for the sufferers, but the frenzy continued to spread. It was a clear sign of the growing submission to the supernatural, and the Pope took notice. In August 1374, he announced that the Inquisition had the right to intervene in trials for sorcery, which had previously been considered a civil crime. This decision was a direct response to the Dancing Mania and the belief that sorcery, which was believed to be aided by demons, fell under the jurisdiction of the Church. While the Dancing Mania was unfolding in the Rhineland, another significant event was taking place in France. Enguerrand de Coucy, a prominent French noble, returned home after a long absence in Italy. He found his native country gaining the upper hand in the ongoing war with England for the first time in 30 years. France now had a king, Charles V, who, though not a great military leader, was a purposeful and determined ruler with a clear goal: the recovery of the territories that had been ceded to England. During Coucy's time in Italy, England had suffered significant losses, including the deaths of 3 of its greatest soldiers, Sir John Chandos, the Captal de Buch, and the Black Prince. Had Coucy been present and active during this period, he might have played a leading role in the war. However, his English marriage and his dual allegiance to both France and England made him a neutral figure. Despite this, his reputation remained untarnished, and he was still highly respected. Charles V, eager to win the support of the great territorial barons, made a special effort to bring Coucy back into the fold. The king summoned Coucy to Paris, feasted him, and asked for news of the Papal War. Coucy then returned home to rejoin his wife, and their reunion was a joyful one, according to the chronicler Froissart. In November 1374, Charles V appointed Coucy as Marshal of France, a position of great honor. However, Coucy felt obliged to decline the baton due to his dual allegiance. The king, recognizing Coucy's value, assigned him an annual pension of 6,000 francs, with a first payment of 1,000 francs in November. This move not only honored Coucy, but also protected his estates from English attacks. During an English raid through Picardy in 1370, the land of the Lord of Coucy was left untouched, and anyone who claimed to belong to Coucy was spared. Even when some people were robbed before their identity was known, they were paid back double the amount. This respect for Coucy's honor was so strong that an unchivalrous knight, the Chevalier de Chin, took advantage of it by carrying a banner with Coucy's arms into a battle in Picardy in 1373. The English, seeing the banner, were confused and did not attack Coucy's land. Charles V's strategy in the war with England was to avoid major battles and instead focus on scattered military actions that would pressure the English at every vulnerable point. One of his key moves was to send Bertrand du Guesclin, a renowned French military leader, back to Spain in 1369 to help King Enrique of Castile regain the throne from King Pedro. The battle near Toledo was a brutal and decisive one. According to Froissart, the two half-brothers, Enrique and Pedro, fought hand-to-hand with awful axe strokes, each cringe Thayer cries, until Pedro was captured. A Spanish chronicler, however, suggests that the capture was less honorable. Trapped in a castle, Pedro offered du Guesclin 6 fiefs and 200,000 gold daubles if he would help him escape. Du Guesclin pretended to accept, led Pedro out secretly, and then turned him over to Enrique. When Pedro tried to kill his brother, a French knight intervened, and Enrique killed Pedro with a dagger. This victory brought Castile back into the French fold, providing invaluable sea power and increasing England's fear of invasion. The English, already weakened by the loss of their greatest leaders, suffered further setbacks. The Black Prince, who had been a formidable military leader, was now bedridden with a debilitating illness. His condition was both a personal and a strategic disaster for England. The prince, once the paragon of chivalry, was now reduced to a helpless invalid, unable to command his forces effectively. The situation in Aquitaine, a key territory for England, was deteriorating rapidly. French nobles were turning against the English, reclaiming castles and towns, and forming small forces to drive the English out. One of the most significant losses for the English was the death of Sir John Chandos, a brilliant military strategist and a key figure in English victories at Crécy, Poitiers, and Nájera. In a skirmish at Lussac in 1370, Chandos fell from his horse and was struck by an enemy sword, which penetrated his brain. His men, who had been fiercely loyal to him, were devastated. They wept and mourned, crying, "Ah, Sir John Chandos, flower of chivalry, unhappily was forged the glaive that thus hath wounded you and brought you in peril of death." Even some French knights felt that Chandos' death was a common loss, as they believed his wisdom and influence might have led to a peaceful resolution between England and France. The Black Prince, enraged by the defection of Limoges, a city that had sworn allegiance to him but then switched sides, decided to make an example of the city. Commanding from a litter, he led a force to Limoges and ordered a brutal massacre. The city was sacked and its walls were razed. The residents, regardless of age or sex, were killed, and the few who could pay ransom were spared. The Bishop of Limoges, who had been complicit in the city's defection, was taken prisoner but later escaped to Avignon. The massacre at Limoges, while effective in the short term, ultimately fueled the hatred of the English that would later lead to the rise of Joan of Arc. With the Black Prince too ill to govern, the rule of Aquitaine was turned over to John of Gaunt. The prince returned to England, where he lived the last 6 years of his life as an invalid. His eldest son, Edward, died at the age of 6, adding to his personal tragedies. The English, now on the defensive, focused on negative strategies, such as the savage raid through northern France, led by Sir Robert Knollys in 1370. The raid was designed to do as much damage as possible, burning crops and villages, but it could not take fortified places or provoke a major battle. As the raid approached Paris, the French appointed du Guesclin as constable to counter the threat. Du Guesclin, known for his cautious and wily approach, formed an alliance with Olivier de Clisson, a formidable Breton knight. Together, they pursued and defeated Nolla's forces, liberating piece by piece the territories that had been ceded to England. The tide of the war was turning, and the English were losing their grip on Aquitaine. The turning point came in June 1372, when the Castilian fleet, led by Admiral Ambrosio Boccanegra, defeated an English convoy off La Rochelle. The English ships, carrying men, horses, and crucially, pound 20,000 in soldiers' pay, were burned, sunk, or routed. The loss of the money weakened England's hold on Aquitaine, and the Castilian control of the sea threatened English communication with Bordeaux, and opened the way for French raids on English shores. King Edward III, now an aging ruler, decided to take matters into his own hands. He assembled a fleet and planned to invade France, but the weather thwarted his efforts. Contrary winds forced the fleet to turn back repeatedly, and after 9 weeks, the king had to abandon the attempt. The failed invasion was a costly and demoralizing blow to England, and it marked the end of a heroic era in the 100 Years' War. The Dancing Mania and the shifting tides of the war in France and England are a testament to the complexity and chaos of the medieval world. The mania was a bizarre and terrifying phenomenon, a manifestation of the deep anxieties and superstitions that gripped society. The war, on the other hand, was a struggle for power and territory that saw the rise and fall of great leaders and the shifting allegiances of nobles and commoners alike. In both cases, the events of the 1370s reshaped the course of history, leaving a lasting impact on the people and the nations involved.